Hi, welcome to our Hashtag Utah Pol. I'm Senator Kathleen Riebe, and this is our first episode, and I have my good friend with me, Carol-Spackman Moss. She's a representative. Carol, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me,
You're welcome.
Senator. I'm Representative Carol-Spackman Moss, and I represent a district HD 34, which is Holiday, part of Mill Creek and part of Murray, and this is my 23rd year, 23rd year in the state legislature. And before that, my professional career was a high school English teacher, 33 years, Olympus High. Wonderful job, wonderful profession, and of course I focus a lot on education issues as a result of having spent a good portion of my life in the public schools.
Carol will be the longest serving
woman in the history of the state legislature. I am now.
That's exciting.
After January 1st, I'm in my 23rd term.
That's exciting. I am also a school teacher, and I remember Carol coming to visit us at our school meetings, and she was always such an inspiration. So it's nice to have a mentor, and now as a friend. I'm a teacher, and I represent Midvale, Canyons School District, Cottonwood Heights, Sandy, and that's about it. Oh, Brighton. I go up to Brighton.
Oh, yeah.
So, like I said, I'm a teacher as well. So we're going to talk about some legislation today. And what kind of legislation do you have running this year?
I have two bills that are deal with the International Baccalaureate Program of IB that a number of high schools in Utah have, and it's very much like advanced placement, which I did teach, AP. It's a program whereby you take classes, advanced classes, and a number of other requirements, including an extended essay and verbal interviews and so on. And if you complete the IB diploma, you get college credit, sometimes up to two years of college credit. But the reason I'm running a bill is because the system of higher education, without consulting with any IB schools or coordinators or IB teachers to really find out what it was about, they passed a bill that reduced the amount of credit you get for IB for getting a score of 4. And it's a very rigorous program. It's known worldwide, and that's why many students come from out of boundary to go to schools like West and Skyline and Hillcrest, because they have that program, because it's credit that's recognized around the world.
Wow, that's a huge savings too.
So I'm trying to get it back in terms of, they've been equating it to concurrent enrollment, which is a good program. I taught that too, but it's only a semester.
Yeah.
And you only get credit if you're going to community college. So, you know, it really was a flaw on the part of the higher education people to just make that change without even contacting the IB. So I was asked by the IB coordinators of many high schools here if I run that bill, and that's what I'm doing. The other one was, it was inadvertently left off a line item that gave it funding, because it's very expensive. Those tests have to be sent all over the world to be graded and evaluated, and it's a subscription program, just like AP. You pay something to the College Board to use their curriculum, and it should have been on that line item when they get a certain amount of funding every year, and it was left off. So those are two of my bills.
That's exciting. You know, I think that brings up a really important point about having great representation up here. We all bring our unique knowledge and our unique experiences to make government better, and I think people don't recognize why that's important and why everyone should feel comfortable running and bringing their expertise with them.
So can I just mention that with teachers, for example, I think currently out of 104, there are about 7 teachers, maybe 8, have been classroom teachers, and you are the only one who's in the classroom, I believe.
I think Doug Welton is still working too.
And that's correct.
Yeah.
And so there's some are Democrats, some are Republican. But the perspective we bring is different from just having been a student or a parent of students, because everybody thinks they know education because they've been a student, but it's very different when you've been in a classroom, as I was with many years, like 8,000 or 9,000 teenagers,
Right.
whose papers I graded, when half of our state budget goes to public education. And
Yep.
so we have the advantage of knowing what kind of programs or what kind of support services will truly help kids learn because we've been in it.
Yeah.
So
And
I
we
wish
also-
more teachers would run for office.
I do too. We also are the largest employer in every county, which I say every
Right.
time. So not only do we spend half the budget, but we also employ a ton of people across the state, which is important. And when you're a school teacher, you actually get to know your families really well and you understand the struggles they have. So we see everything from a different perspective. I think that's really important, that we see kids who are struggling, kids who are thriving, mental health, physical health, and I think it makes you a more compassionate leader.
Well, and it also, when we've seen bills in the last 2 years about transparency, they call it, like parents say, we want to know what's going on in the classroom.
Yeah.
And we want teachers to have to post things 30 days ahead. There's
Yeah.
a bill like that. Well, as any teacher, the 400 who wrote to me in about 24 hours would know, whether it's kindergarten
Yeah.
or you're teaching, AP calculus, that you have something set out and you might list it on the Canvas system.
Yeah.
But you change things depending on whether the kids are learning or not. If you're teaching fractions in 4th grade and the kids don't get it in a week, then
Yeah.
you extend it. And so if, for example, when that bill was being run, the war in Ukraine just broke out.
Yes.
And we joked, but seriously, about the fact that, if you're teaching social studies or current events, you can't talk about it.
Yeah.
because
Yes.
for 2 more weeks because
Yeah.
you didn't list it. I mean, it was just so absurd
It is absurd.
because what they didn't see is there's creativity involved in being
Yes.
a good teacher. You alter things because something suddenly, like I decide I'm teaching a poem that
Yeah.
fits exactly with what we were discussing the day before. Oh, I didn't list it on my
Yeah.
disclosure or my Canvas, and so I can't teach it. No, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You take away the professionalism, the creativity of a great teacher.
Well, I had that similar conversation with somebody who was misunderstanding that bill, and I said, sometimes I'll come into school and I'm all ready to teach a great lesson, and there'll be a fight on the playground, and they'll use a racial slur, and we have to address that. You have to talk about what's actually happening in your school, and sometimes you do have to throw those plans out the window to address something that's happening in the world or in their home or on the playground. So I think that is a ridiculous bill.
And that reminds me of another example. A few years ago, my daughter, who teaches high school English, had a young man died by suicide. He wasn't in her class, but many of his friends were.
Yeah.
And they were so distraught
Yeah.
that she spent that class period talking to kids about how they should reach out
Yep.
for help if they feel like life is hopeless,
Yeah.
or tell their parents they really need to see a counselor and they need some help to get through this,
Yeah.
because a number of those kids did get counseling then. So you're more than just a teacher teaching a set number of
I
things
agree.
in your curriculum. You really there are other roles you should play, and they're really critical to a kid, to benefit kids.
We had a similar experience when they had a school shooting. We were in a relocatable, and we had to talk about what would we do if something happened like that. And so our kids really do want us to be people for them and people they can rely on. So it's interesting how we are always moving fluidly through these really traumatic things sometimes. So what do you think about this new bill that we have coming out, HB 215?
Well, it was certainly not the way I'd prefer to start a session.
Yeah.
Where you kind of go in with, high hopes for a nice sense of camaraderie, and here it came the first week, and it seemed like it was all predetermined, that they already had the votes, and it was just kind of a formality to go through the hearings, which were packed with people, overflow rooms, and
Yes.
Passionate about public school, and that private schools and homeschoolers shouldn't get the same kind of tax the same kind of funding from income taxes that public schools need, because they've always been underfunded, and we're still like, well, only Idaho's below us in per pupil funding. And so the rooms were filled with homeschoolers and private school people and public school teachers. And interestingly enough, some of the homeschool parents and those who send their kids to private school that you would think would have been in favor of it, spoke against it because they don't want any kind of regulation.
Yes.
But sadly, this doesn't have a lot of regulations.
Yes, hardly any.
And so some of the things that are concerning is private schools don't require all their teachers to be licensed or even have degrees necessarily.
Yep.
They certainly don't have the endorsements that a teacher would have to teach a higher level math, for example. If a school is below 150 students, the teachers don't have to go through a fingerprinted criminal background check. One person I know that teaches at a private school said they don't have any safety plans. They don't have regular fire drills. They don't have protocols like keeping doors locked during the day and having a single entry in a smaller school. And then even bigger problem is any children with any kind of disability, if their parents take one of these vouchers, they are eliminated from the federal law for IDEA. And that means if your child is on the autism spectrum or they have vision issues or hearing or speech language pathologists or in the public schools to help kids, and all those things are denied you, and it's just a shame that a parent would not, when it's provided by law. And so they're giving up a lot, and a lot of them say, well, they know best what educational experience fits their kids, but maybe in the early years you can get programs to teach reading and so on. Do you know how to do calculus? Do you know can you teach your kids chemistry? Maybe some can. But generally speaking, the people that they say it's aimed at, low income and minority, which offends a lot of minorities, because their parents are working 2 jobs. They wouldn't have transportation available. And if kids, and this is the case in many situations, especially refugee and new, immigrants, some kids are living in cars.
I know.
Do they have food? If they go to school, they get breakfast, lunch, and food to take home. I mean, the public schools take care of many needs, right or wrong, what we do, that these people would be giving up.
I agree. I think we're going to be wrapping up soon.
Okay.
And I think I agree with you with all those things you just said. It's a very problematic bill. On the floor, Senator Bramble asked me if I'd vote for it if he adopted my amendment, and I told him I would, which was kind of funny because it would have been a great amendment, and then they would have had a vote. But
did you?
They did not bring on my amendment.
What was your amendment?
To eliminate the transportation voucher, because I was worried about kids being in cars with providers, ride shares. So this is our first episode, and I'm so glad to have my good friend Carol with me. We're going to try to do one of these a week so that we can talk about some of the issues that are happening around the Capitol. Thanks.